Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little, and today I want to share with you a hand from a $1,500 buy-in World Series of Poker event. This is the 89th episode of Weekly Poker Hand, and since the World Series of Poker is just around the corner, I wanted to briefly discuss my World Series of Poker coaching videos I put together. This is a large group of videos that I think will help you have the best chance of success at the World Series of Poker. To see all the information about that, go to floattheturn.com, floattheturn.com/WSOP to check those out. But let's go ahead and get into this hand. In this hand, let me actually restart it. There is a semi-active player under the gun at 600, 1200. He raises to 2,600 out of his 60,000 stack, and I have Ace-King offsuit in 4th position, so the low jack seat. And with Ace-King offsuit in this scenario, I think you can go either way. I think you can either re-raise to get it in, or you can just call. Those who have studied my game know that I do not particularly like to re-raise under the gun raisers with anything. And the reason for that is because they should be incredibly strong. And if they should be incredibly strong, I don't want to be messing around so much. So I like to call here. Also, if our opponent is messing around a bit, we're going to have a hand that should have him dominated a huge portion of the time. So I'm a pretty big fan of calling in this scenario, which is what I do this time. And we see the flop heads up. Flop comes King, 8-7, 2 hearts. Pretty good flop for Ace-King. I have the King of Hearts in my hand. The semi-active player bets 3,600. This is another situation where I think we need to just call. Notice if I raise and my opponent has pocket queens or jacks or tens, something like that, he's going to strongly consider folding. And you really don't want to let your opponent fold whenever they're drawing dead. Also, our opponent could sporadically have us beat. He could have pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket eights, or maybe pocket twos. I don't think that's very likely. We're playing our hand as the effective nuts, but if I had the nuts here, say I had pocket twos, I would still just call. I recognize there is a flush draw available, but it's relatively hard to have a flush draw raising under the gun. You just play many more big card hands and pairs than you do suited cards. So this is a spot where I think calling is by far the best play. There's no point in raising and trying to get it in immediately or protect your hand. Turn is a 6 of hearts. We have the King of Hearts. Our opponent checks, and I decide to bet 3,800 into the 16,000 pot. So a relatively small bet. If you remember back to the start of the hand, I started with roughly 30,000 chips, and now I'm betting 3,800 into the 16,000, leaving myself 23,000 behind. Notice if our opponent calls our 3,800 bet, the pot will go up to 24,000, and we'll have about a pot size bet going to the river. I actually think I would prefer a slightly bigger bet in this scenario, because you always want to set yourself up to have roughly a 3/4 pot bet on the river, because whenever you have a 3/4 pot bet, your opponent's going to be much more likely to call if you go all in that spot than if you bet full pot or over pot. So I like a slightly larger bet, but 3,800 is still fine. Actually, I'm sorry, I misread the stacks a little bit. We actually have 20,000 left on the river, and the pot's 23,000, 24,000. So I did fine in this scenario. Maybe I still should have bet a little bit bigger. River's a 7 of spades, so flush does not come in. And my opponent checks, and I bet 4,800. I decided on this river that my opponent likely has a hand like queens, jacks, tens, or nines. If I thought he had a king, like king, queen, or king, jack, I certainly would have gone all in. But given the way he's played this hand, I must have assumed that he had a hand worse than a king. So if he has a hand worse than a king, there is no point in going all in. It's always nice in setting up the stack such that you can go all in if you would like, but you don't have to. Like, imagine if the river was a king, I would definitely go all in, or if it was an ace, I would definitely... Well, I don't know if I would go all in on ace. I'd probably bet small on the ace as well, because again, if my opponent has queens, jacks, or tens, he's just not going to call a big bet. So this is a pretty good spot to bet small, given what our opponent did. Remember, he raised under the gun, bet the flop, check, called the turn. That's typically a weak sign, and then check the river. So whenever that happens, you have to recognize that your opponent probably has only a marginal made hand. So we bet 4,800, and my opponent calls, so we expect to win. But then he shows pocket aces, and we lose. Had this hand played out differently, I certainly would have gone broke. You have to realize that even though we lost this hand, it was actually a really good result because we had ace king on king XXXX and we win. Well, we don't win. We don't lose all of our chips. Anytime you don't lose all of your chips in the spot, it effectively is a win. Some people may look at the river and say, should you have valued bet? But I definitely think we should have value bet. Our opponent could easily have king, queen, and call every time. He could easily have king, jack, and call every time. He could easily have pocket queens and probably call a small bet. So I think we played the hand fine. And this is an example of a spot where our opponent left a ton of money on the table. If he just raises under the gun and goes bet, 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 I'm calling off every time and stacking off. And instead, he left me with 10 big blinds. I don't know if I did anything with that 10 big blinds, but you certainly don't want to let your opponent just keep 10 big blinds for free. So do not make that error. And again, if you want to get access to the large World Series of Poker coaching package I have put together, go to floattheturn.com/WSOP. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Weekly Poker Hand. I'll talk to you next time.